No, that sounds like a porno. No, right, let's move on.
Cancel. Yeah, move it on.
Getting really practical, I suppose, and using you as the example.
But put me on the spot. I'm in the hot seat.
Welcome to How to Take the Lead, the podcast where we challenge the myths and stereotypes of what it means to be a leader today and help you to succeed in post without compromise. I'm Lee Griffith.
And I'm Carrie-Ann Wade, and together we will be your guides, questioning everything we've ever learnt about leadership, sharing our experiences along the way, and inspiring you to make a real impact in your role.
Visit howtotakethelead.com for show notes, past episodes, and to join our community.
Enjoy this episode.
So we're back for another episode of How to Take the Lead. Good afternoon, Carrie-Ann. How are you feeling this fine week?
I am good, thank you very much, Lee. I'm feeling all right. I feel like time is whizzing by faster than the speed of light, but otherwise I'm feeling good. How are you feeling?
I thought when you first started talking, I thought you were going to say, I feel like chicken tonight. I don't know why that was a very niche reference there.
And we're always showing our age on this blooming podcast with our niche weird references to stuff on TV and magazines and things. Board games. I actually am having chicken tonight if you're interested. But not the chicken tonight, if that makes sense.
Do they still even do those? That's still a thing.
No idea. I've got it lined up with things like Frey Bentos pies. Do they still
I think
exist?
They still exist, yeah.
Like sort of easy, something in a jar, just zhuzh it and go. Yeah, chicken tonight.
I saw someone reference Smash the other day, and I definitely thought that was an 80s, like left in the 80s, but someone was definitely...
There's powdered mashed potato vibes. Oh, did not know that was a thing. Everything's having everything from our youth is having a comeback, it would seem. Anyway, nobody cares what I'm having for dinner. How's your week been, Lee?
My week's been good. It's been a good week. It's kind of hump day today, isn't it, when we're recording this?
Yes.
So we're at that midpoint of the week where it's either going to go up or down. Who knows?
And on a cliff edge. We've not got a sense which way it's going to go. So you've left us hanging there, Lee. So next episode, I'm going to be checking in. Did it go up or did it go down?
So if you are new to the podcast or you're watching us for the first time on YouTube, hello, please do hit subscribe, follow, whatever the button says on your device so that you keep getting this fantastic leadership chat that we are demonstrating so clearly as we open this episode. Join our Substack community if you haven't already. That's where we kind of old school blogging style, just having a bit of a non-verbal chit chat about leadership stuff. So if that's your thing, come and join us there. Our reading list's still available. We love a leadership book recommendation, I should say. That's available if you sign up to the community.
Absolutely. There might be some new lists coming for a new year, potentially, just to zhuzh things up a little bit, to keep things exciting.
Yeah. Tell us, if we were to do a leadership list, what would you want us to list? That could be a good challenge for this episode.
I had in my head TV programs that are weirdly about leadership without being about leadership. But I love that. I know. Well, that was just in my head, but we want to respond to listeners' needs and the style of listening and engaging and understanding what our stakeholders want. Let's throw it open to the listeners.
I could do a whole list of TV recommendations just based around Murder, She Wrote. So that might be too niche for this audience, but if there is, if my fellow kin are out there and want that, let me know.
I mean, if there are fellow kin out there for you, I've got the sense there might be a third podcast on the horizon. Just very nichely about that. I'm going to have this I'm going to be distracted all episode now while I try and think about what that podcast needs to be called.
Jessica Does Leadership. No, that sounds like a porno. No, right, let's move on.
Cancel. Yeah, move it on.
Today's episode, right, so we've kind of, I think, touched on this already in the 2 episodes that have already been happened. Great English there. The 2 episodes that we've already broadcast and published in this series have touched on this topic, but I want to delve a little deeper into leadership strategy. And I don't mean your organisational strategy, though obviously you do need one of those too, and that's a whole other topic. I'm talking about your personal strategy as a leader. So this is one of the 3 cogs. I'm going to go for cogs.
We're having cogs this series. Yeah. We've had buckets before. Now we're having cogs. Love it.
This is one of 3 cogs that I think is essential for leaders to consider if they're going to make the right impact in their role. So for me, having that clarity in your leadership strategy is like the most important thing, because it's how you determine how you operate in your post, how you operate in your organisation. It's how you define what your approach is going to be, what your style is, what your values are. It's basically your vision for what you want to achieve and how you're going to achieve it as a leader. And as I say, we've kind of touched on this already in a couple of the past episodes, but I really want to focus in on this because I think we can get too caught up in organisational strategy and all of that kind of stuff, and that you lose the essence of you and what you want to achieve as a leader. So Carrie-Ann, what's your views? Does having a personal leadership strategy vary from an organisational leadership one? And is it something that you've seen?
It's definitely different. So having a leadership strategy is definitely different from having an organisational strategy, and where the organisational strategy is there to set the direction of travel for the organisation, the goals, the targets, kind of where the organisation is heading. For me, if you are a leader in that organisation, having your own personal leadership strategy is really important, because I feel like that's very much part of the how you get there. Like, how is that going to be delivered? It's almost for me like the human part of that. And actually, you could move to a different organisation that's got a different organisational strategy, but actually your personal leadership strategy might not change that much, because it's really about who you are and your approach as a leader, and being really clear about that and how you're going to implement that. So that was definitely my kind of first thoughts in that space.
Yeah. One of the things that I often talk about with leaders, and if anyone's listened to my other podcast, you'll have heard me mention
little plug there. Love it.
So Leaders with Impact.
Podcast heathen. Yeah.
But as a leader, you're going to be suited for certain types of either situations or certain types of organisations, and over time you will figure out where you thrive, and all of that I think becomes part of your strategy when you go for new roles. For example, the this is who I am and this is what I offer, which is kind of what you were saying there, Carrie-Ann. So how consciously have you thought about your personal leadership strategy and approach?
I would say, I've been thinking about this, and I would say I probably for longer than I would initially recognise, but I probably wouldn't have seen it at the time as being consciously focused on my own personal leadership strategy. So I think probably from my point of view, now looking back with hindsight, where some of that started was recognising and learning from other leaders that I've worked with and been around. So as I've been progressing through my own leadership journey, maybe thinking about like the styles of leader that have really got the best out of me, and maybe those who've inadvertently or maybe even on purpose got the worst out of me, and kind of reflecting back on my own leadership approach and style and going like, oh yeah, for me, like that resonates, and I'm going to be intentional in terms of being more like that because that suits me as a person, and I'm going to intentionally do less of that because I don't think that is really particularly motivational. But I don't think when I was thinking those things at the time, I thought, oh, that's about my personal leadership strategy. But I think as I've become more experienced, and you touched on sort of understanding maybe what your strengths are as a leader, I think there's something in there about understanding sort of your own values and what's important to you. I think I have been more intentional with the leadership strategy, mostly focused on trying to get the best out of the people that I'm leading for the organisation that I'm in. So that's probably been about thinking about what's important for me and how I feel like I can be the best leader. So things that are important to me are around collaboration, compassion, authenticity, integrity. And I've been looking to create those conditions, I guess, as I've evolved and developed as a leader. And then I've made some conscious decisions about actually where sometimes my leadership style and approach doesn't fit, that maybe that's not the right place for me. And that's not to say you can't be adaptable as a leader, but I do think there are some things that are really intrinsic to how you might approach your leadership strategy and what feels good for you that you're actually going to be able to deliver on, which means sometimes you will make those different decisions, which is actually, this isn't the space for me now. And for example, I know part of my personal leadership strategy is always about growth and development of the team that I'm leading. I feel like that's actually what I'm really good at. I'm good at growing and developing people and teams, and sometimes doing that from scratch. So actually, I've been naturally drawn to roles and organisations where that opportunity's been there to enable me to enact that kind of leadership strategy, I guess. So yeah, that's some of my own initial thoughts and reflections around that space for me personally. How about you? Oh, you've got a question.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I was going to say, how has it driven your job search, I suppose, because I do think this is part of the positioning that you do when you're applying for roles and you're thinking about career development. Your strategy is about aligning up your USP with what an organisation might be seeking. So yeah, so how's that worked?
I think that's something about the research that you do into those organisations, isn't it? And so there's something for me about some of my personal sort of drivers and values definitely align themselves better to public sector, voluntary sector, more that kind of service-based space rather than maybe a more cutthroat, or my perception of, that's terrible to say, isn't it? But maybe a more corporate sector that's perhaps more financially driven. So yeah. I feel like my leadership is maybe better suited to organisations that are more about providing service for people than perhaps anything else. So that's definitely maybe driven some of my career choices and my professional growth. And then I think there's also been something about really trying to understand as best you can. You don't really know this until you go into an organisation, do you? But understanding what the leadership team and the culture and the ethos of the organisation that you're going to be a leader in is really like, as best you can. Like sometimes you might be, a bit blindsided by something that you weren't expecting, but actually being able to kind of understand what are other people's perceptions of this organisation. How do people feel about working there or receiving a service from that organisation? And then kind of weighing up, like, what's my value add going to be in that space? Because sometimes there won't necessarily feel like there is one. And then you kind of think, okay, will I be able to have impact? And there is something for me about understanding that everyone in that leadership space that you're going into has probably got their own leadership strategy and approach and style. And while you want the alignment, personally, for me, I don't want to work with a whole set of people who are exactly like me, because I feel like that challenge won't be there and that diversity of thinking won't be there. So as much as there might be certain other types of leaders that I definitely wouldn't want to work with because I would find it far too challenging, I don't want to work with lots of people who are just going to operate and have the same leadership strategy as I've got, because that might feel like there's no sort of grit in the oyster. Or I don't know if I've got the right saying now, am I doing lean? But you know what I mean? You need that bit of challenge to kind of keep you motivated and energized, I think, and thinking differently.
Yeah, I think that's why it doesn't matter if there is a misalignment, I suppose, between an organisational strategy and your leadership strategy, as long as you aren't fundamentally opposed. Yes. I think that's the thing. You can have, I'm trying to think of an example where there has been a mismatch a little bit. And there isn't one that's coming immediately to mind, but I'm thinking of there can be leaders, I don't know, maybe an organisation's really into growth, but your leadership strategy is around how do I get growth through nurturing, so I don't focus on that growth per se. I focus on how do I get the best out of people, and a byproduct of that will be growth. I don't know, that's probably not the best example, but I do think
I had a similar one in my head about change. Like if the organisational strategy is about like a turnaround or a change, but actually your leadership strategy is something about trying to keep things more settled and on an even keel and like balance for people, that might be that's not quite the right description, but that might be quite challenging because you're probably not going to be operating in a space where that feels comfortable and that you feel able to have impact.
Yeah, and I think that's the nuance you need to be mindful of the scale of misalignment. So we've talked about different leaders are suited for different situations. So part of your strategy is that awareness of knowing what type of leader you are and where you're going to thrive in what types of conditions. And then that becomes your USP. So some leaders are people who will, I'm the turnaround leader. I'm just going to come in, I'm going to do short action and I'm going to get results. But then I'm going to exit pretty quickly because I'm not the one that's going to stick around and nurture and build culture. You'll need a different kind of leader for that. So part of your positioning of your leadership strategy is understanding, well, I'm this kind of person versus that kind of person, and aligning how you talk about yourself with what the goals might be of an organisation, and identifying, I suppose, what the extent of risk they want to take on you as your leadership approach, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And there will always be that level of risk involved, won't there? Like for the organisation and then you personally, but also for you going into a group of leaders who maybe might be more established in that organisation, or you might be challenging some of their thinking. And like I said, you know, you were talking about what approaches been that have worked for us. As much as you can try and do your research and understand where that fit might be or where that misalignment potentially might be and work out whether that's okay. Just sometimes you just won't know until you're in that space and it's all working itself through, because sometimes that misalignment, like you say, if it's not a huge amount, doesn't matter because there's someone else in that leadership team with you who can do the bit that's, you know, their skill or their expertise or where their strengths lie, where yours don't, and that's okay. And I think sometimes you have to think about that when you're building your own team. So I think about that a lot when I build teams, and I'm thinking about who might be the right fit to be in a deputy position for me, for example, because there will have to be some alignment, but actually their leadership strategy can be different to mine. It doesn't have to be the same, because again, you want that bit of rub sometimes and that bit of constructive challenge that will bring.
So if someone's listening to this and they're knowing that perhaps they're not being very clear with their people, so maybe they're not bringing people together around a vision, they might be giving mixed messages about who they are, they may be struggling to define what sets them apart from other leaders. How do you start to go about getting that clarity around you and your strategy?
I think for me, if you're thinking about how you start to work out what your leadership strategy should be, you do have to do that in a sort of self work, if I'm honest. I think you do have to be clear, for example, on what your values are and how you might be demonstrating those values, because it's really easy to say your values are like, you know, collaboration, compassion, all of those things, but actually you probably have to start questioning and seeking, so we know I've talked about this before, seeking some feedback to work out whether that is actually how you are coming across, and it's not just a tick box of me saying all these things. Actually, do I deliver on those things from a values point of view? I think you have to think about how you are articulating your vision, and test that out with people, find out if that's landing. I mean, first of all, you have to obviously be clear what your vision is, and I think that's really linked to your purpose. And I think we talked in a previous episode, even in this series, about your why. Understanding your why, I think, is quite important, but it's also important to be able to articulate that to people in a way that matters to them. And it's something that we've talked about before when we've entered teams as new leaders, but there is something about understanding the sort of stakeholder needs and testing that out through the lens of your own leadership strategy. So actually what, you know, and that's the conversation I think we were just starting to have around, you know, what do these people need from me as a leader, And is that something that I'm able to deliver on or not? And being able to accept that maybe it's okay if it isn't, a different type of leadership is required that might not sit comfortably with you. So that's how you make some of those decisions. But I think once you're starting to think about those things around your personal values, vision, purpose, the next step is then to create that intent. So is everything that you're doing intentional in terms of demonstrating and delivering on that leadership strategy that you're starting to define for yourself? Because if it isn't, then something doesn't feel quite right there, I would say.
Yeah. It can sound really grand, what's your leadership strategy? But it is just like an organisational or a programme strategy. You need to have that vision, you need to have objectives, you need to be clear on what your measures are so you know what your outcomes that you're seeking to. You need to have some tactics, you need to be clear on your messaging, you need to be able to then map that out and go, right, well, if for example, if you are starting in a new role, and it could be, well, my leadership strategy for my first 100 days is going to be by the end of the 100 days I want to have heard and understood the concerns of my organisation. I want to have a clear roadmap of how we're going to define what the organisational strategy is going to be. I want to have met the key stakeholders or whatever it could be, and then that broken down. So it's really, really intentional to the point that you will be able to measure the impact that you're having.
And I think, there are a couple of things that came into my head as you were talking there. And one is about that measurement. So actually you also have to build in those opportunities to evaluate how it is going, and actually does something need a tweak? Have you been too focused on one part of your leadership strategy and ignored another bit that actually needs you to invest some more time and energy in it? How is it landing with people? How are people feeling about the way in which you're leading them? Are they getting the results you wanted them to get through your leadership? So I think that evaluation and sort of measurement point is really important. And then, I know you talk about it a lot, Lee, with your 100-day plan conversations, but I think, there's something for me, and I was going to say there was an example of a chief exec who I know you know well in the NHS, Laura Scaife-Knight, who started a new job in a new organisation and talked about her intentions for her first 100 days quite publicly on her social media channels, and then published her 100-day report, which was her findings from what she set out to achieve. And I think that's the other bit. There is absolutely no point, and this does not matter if it's your own personal leadership strategy, an organisational strategy, or any other form of strategy in between, if you're not able to communicate that strategy and you're not signalling to people that you are operating with intent to deliver on that, what's the blooming point in having one? It just becomes a document or thoughts in your head or whatever that's just filed away, and you've done a huge amount of work investing in it, but then you're not actually keeping it alive. So that being able to communicate what your strategy is as important as when we've talked about communicating your vision, giving clarity around direction of travel. Like, I think it's as important to be able to get comfortable in talking about what your leadership strategy is with the people that you are working with.
That's absolutely why I see it as a cog, because for me, the 3 cogs are that complete clarity on what your leadership strategy is, then that piece around self-leadership, and I mean by that, how are you executing your leadership strategy? What are the boundaries you're setting? How are you working? How are you organising in yourself and the people around you? And then the communications being the 3rd cog. So if you're not communicating those other 2 things and you're not giving clarity around those things, then you're not going to take people with you. And you need all 3 of those to be moving in harmony for you to have the right impact in a leadership role.
Yeah. Absolutely. I don't disagree with you. I think that's really important. And like you say, none of that really works if you take one bit out.
No.
So it's so interwoven, isn't it? And we've talked a lot about, clarity you need to give as a leader and how to communicate better as a leader. So absolutely, I can see how that all works. So definitely for me, it's about that, once you've done that work to determine what your leadership strategy might look and feel like and what it actually is. It's that kind of delivery of it and acting within, being intentional to operate in the way that you've set out from the point of view of your leadership strategy.
Getting really practical, I suppose, and using you as the example.
But put me on the spot. I'm in the hot seat.
How much we talk about intentionality, we talk about awareness, we talk about all this stuff. How much time and space are you giving to the development and evolution of your leadership strategy?
Oh, if I'll be really honest, because what's the point in having this conversation if you're not as much as I probably should be. And I think that's probably one of the challenges that leaders face, because they get so caught up in everything else that's happening in their organisation that they maybe don't feel like they are able to, or often don't feel like they should, because maybe it feels a bit selfish, because you're talking about you as a person, aren't you? Like individually, making the space to do that reflection, that monitoring, that checking in. I think sometimes you feel a bit of guilt about making that time to do that, but I think it is absolutely crucial to do. I have to say, I probably do it better, and I don't know if this is going to make sense when I say it. I probably do it better in the space in which I operate through Cat's Pajamas as my business than I do maybe in my day job. And I think I don't know, I think I carve out more time in that space to be intentional around, being really open about trying to demonstrate what my values are, for example, as part of my leadership strategy. So people are clear, like what I stand for as a leader and as an individual. And I think maybe on reflection, I could do more of that in my day job space, because actually that would be helpful for my team and my team's own growth, and obviously the broader organisation. So I think, as you've said it and put me in the hot seat, I'm starting to think like, how can I weave this more into just how I operate as a leader, rather than it being right in once every whatever it is, once a month, I'm going to set time aside to spend a good chunk of time being focused on that. It's about how do you actually make it part of your business as usual. So every day you're kind of checking in on this. And there probably are subconscious ways that you are doing that through feedback from other people, where you think, oh, that reflects on me because I clearly haven't articulated my vision properly or whatever. And so you do make those small tweaks and adjustments, and you're probably not aware that you're doing it. But we've talked a lot, haven't we, in How to Take the Lead, about carving out that time to deliver as a leader and like understand what you're all about and reflect and learn and grow. And so I think it's definitely important to do. And I am conscious that I make time to do it, but I guess it's about flipping that to go, I shouldn't be making time to do it. It should just be part of how you operate every day.
Yeah. It can feel a bit grandiose, can't it? To go, I need to work on my leadership strategy. Actually,
for people watching, there was a great expression there. For those on the podcast, sorry, but that was a brilliant face, Lee.
But it's that sense of, it doesn't need to be this. You don't need a document that you put on your shelf never to look at again. It is all about intentionality of showing up, and it could be as simple as, look, what's my end game, and what are the stepping stones I'm going to do to get to the end game, whatever that might be. And then reflections at the end of each week around, how am I showing up as a leader this week? And do I feel comfortable with this?
And we do lots of things, don't we, generally in life around things like gratitude journaling and all of that kind of, what 3 things am I grateful for this week, this day, whatever. But actually you could very easily build into a daily practice something around leadership for sure. And there's even things where I have started to think about how I manage my time during the week and having my like 3 non-negotiables of the week. And actually, if other stuff doesn't happen, those 3 non-negotiables are really important. And actually, those 3 non-negotiables don't have to be really operational things. They could be about, okay, this week I need to prioritize working with my team and being really clear on setting out my vision, because I feel like I haven't done that very well recently, or that things have shifted and I've not articulated that. So those sorts of things should be part of like what you want to achieve in a week. It shouldn't just be like, make sure I've got the budget setting sorted, like all the really operational stuff that might be part of your role.
But you say like budget setting, why would you be focusing on budget setting if you're not clear on what the outcome you're trying to achieve? Like, we could jump into the execution of the operational detail without ever tying it back up. And this is where I think your leadership strategy is the anchor that you can keep returning back to, because you're going, right, the decisions I've made this week, are they aligned with where we need to go to? And if they're not aligned to, or they're the types of things I don't need to be making decisions about, then I've got a bigger question around how am I prioritising my time? What am I focusing on? All of that kind of stuff.
And I think that can be part of your leadership strategy, can't it? About actually doing that check-in, that you are spending your time as a leader on what you should be spending your time on as a leader. And that's part of being intentional as well, isn't it? And I've definitely noticed that recently for me. I have shifted my strategy around that, because for various reasons I have found myself and others in my own leadership team, that thing we hate, getting into the weeds of stuff and being far too operational and having to do that self-check, going, actually, that's not what I'm here for. I'm not here to be solving the problem. I've got trusted people whose job it is to do that. I'm here to be up here thinking about the longer term strategy, and actually those weedy things that people are dealing with down here, what's the impact they're going to have into the future, for example. So I think you can do those check-ins for yourself, can't you, where you might just go, I'm drifting away from my leadership strategy a bit here, and I just need to pull myself back into it. And there might be actual actions you have to take to do that, like delegate more, give decision making to other people when it's not a decision you need to be involved in. So, and some of that will be really complex, because there might be a whole host of reasons in the background why that creep or shift away from your strategy has started to happen. But actually being conscious of that and aware of it, and being able to start having those conversations even just with yourself is quite a helpful space to be in.
Yeah. Great. Well, we're getting to the end of our time, and I could be talking about this for forever. Well, I do talk about this every day because it's my job, but that aside, we need to wrap up this episode because people need to get on and do the doing. So head into our how-tos, I suppose. What one action do you think someone could take following our conversation today to help them to get clarity on defining what their leadership strategy is?
Does there have to be one, or can I have two? Just be like, sorry, I'm not following the rules. I definitely think there's something for me about taking some time to yourself initially to start, particularly if you've maybe not considered yourself as having a leadership strategy before, to actually do some of that work about defining what that might need to look like for you. And I think you will need to get input into that at some point. Some of that will be the testing it out with people. Some of it might be through a coach like yourself, Lee, or a mentor, just to kind of maybe support you to think a bit differently if leadership strategy hasn't been something that you've really dealt with before. So I think it would be about, posing some of those questions to yourself and really challenging yourself about what that might look like. And I also think maybe identify, because the bit for me is about the acting with intent. So maybe look to identify some leaders, maybe who are high profile in the public sphere, or maybe people that you work with yourself, where actually when you consider it, you can see that they are actually enacting their own leadership strategy. Because I think you can tell who those people are that you work with or that you see in the public domain, and maybe start to get a sense from them about how they might be actually doing it. What like, how are they showing up? Why do you get the sense that they're very clear on what their leadership strategy is, and how are they acting with intent? And that they might be people you have the opportunity to have a conversation with about that. But if not, maybe just observe some of that and see what that looks like and feels like for you, so that you can start to think about you operating in a similar sort of space.
Yeah, fantastic. I think that's really useful. The only thing I would add to build on what you've said is it goes back to impact for me. So ask yourself, what's the impact I want to make in my role, in my organisation, whatever it might be, and then compare that against what's the impact you think you're having, and test that a little bit and to see where the gap is. And then you can be more conscious and intentional in trying to close it.
And I think that's a really good one for people who are have been a leader somewhere for a long time, because I guess it's easy, isn't it, to focus on that if you're new in this space, what's your strategy going to be? But actually, even if you've got one or you've never had one, there's always opportunity as a leader to revisit and refresh. So I think that's a really good piece of advice, Lee.
Perfect. Well, thank you. That was a quick whiz through, but we will be back next week with more how to take the lead in stuff. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to hit follow to make sure you get the next episode. And if today's discussion resonated, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts.
We also have our Substack community where you can get behind the scenes info, ask us anything sessions, and build your network with like-minded leaders. Visit howtotakethelead.substack.com to find out more.
And if you want to work with us to challenge and change leadership in your organisation, get in touch by dropping us an email, howtotakethelead@gmail.com, or DM us on the socials. Until next week,
get out there and take the lead.